Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Amazing Podcast. We're so glad that you tuned in. I'm Twain Taylor, editor at Amazing. Do visit our website, amazic.com, because we spend a lot of time in just covering like the latest, the greatest, some of the coolest things that are being built in this space. So if you want to know some of the happening open source projects and views from actual builders and innovators in this space, amazic.com is where you want to go. So definitely check it out. I'm excited because I have with me today uh, Andrew Rynhard, who is the CTO at Sidero Labs. And they're a cool company in Kubernetes, but they're taking quite a niche and a different approach, solving for a very specific market within the broader Kubernetes ecosystem. And I'm quite excited to hear about what they're up to. Andrew, it's great to have you with us. How are you doing?
It's great to be here. Thank you for reaching out to me. I'm excited about this. I'm doing well. It's warm out here in Texas, but and I'm on the third floor, so I'm a little hot, but I'm managing.
Yeah, sunny is not too bad. So, Andrew, want to just get to know, you a bit as we start. Um, what have you been up to before Sedero Labs, and how did you become CTO at Sidero Labs? What were you doing before that?
That's a good question. I have a pretty non-traditional background in how I got into tech. Um, how far back should I go? I guess what I could blend in is a little bit of why or how I learned my skill set in order to build
All
Talos
right.
Linux, and we can go from there. And um, my interest in technology, it really started with music when I was a teenager, but when it really focused on Linux was my first Android phone. I got an Android phone and I read all about these cool things you could do with it, and I stumbled across this
Was it?
thing, this forum called XDA forums, and I could
Oh,
root my phone. And
yeah.
so I
Oh
went through
man,
the process of like, yeah, I went through the process of like rooting my phone, and I wanted to make it faster, and all I really did was just
which one was it, by the way?
kill
Was it
the Droid
Nexus?
One, the Droid
Which
One.
Droid? Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it the
Yep.
one you could flip up? I
Yeah,
think.
it would slide up. Yep,
Yeah,
exactly.
yes, right. I remember that.
Yeah, so I follow this tutorial, and I end up compiling this kernel, and I turn on my phone, and it's faster, and then a couple hours later it's really hot, and a couple months later the battery's destroyed. But in that process, I learned a whole lot about Linux, and I think more importantly, what I learned was that I have a love for this and a fascination with the idea that I can write these things in text and it can control physical things in my life. And that really just blew my mind. And so from there, I started to learn more about Linux, and eventually I got deep into Docker. I've been using Docker since it was beta. Um, got obsessed with automation, and started running my own production services like an email server, a Plex media server, and these things like that. Had my wife's phone running off of it, my phone running off of it. So I'm providing full on like Google Workspace um, functionality with a calendar and everything. Um, and then eventually one day at the time I was studying physics in college, and I was kind of struggling, to be honest with you. I should have chosen software. I was just more natural at that, but I wanted to reach beyond the how, and I wanted to know why. And physics kind of really felt like it scratched that itch for me. Um, so at the time when I was studying physics at UCSB, was I was doing something called jujitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu. It's a grappling art, it's martial arts, and that's where I met our CEO, Steve Francis. We were on the mats one day. Uh, we were just sitting there, like, "Oh yeah, what do you do, and what's going on?" I'm like, "Yeah, well, I'm thinking about dropping out of college because I have a kid, and and it's expensive, and it's getting tough. And I have a real passion for software. I've been teaching myself how to do these things. I was writing mobile apps and all these things. It's like, oh, okay, well, why don't we get you a job at a company that I founded called Logic Monitor, or at least try to. I didn't get in because of him. Well, I like to think I didn't get in because he said make it happen. I like to think I got in because I had at least some competence. So I end up getting this interview, and I get a junior role, and that was my first job. So it's a pretty non-traditional approach. I didn't actually go to school for this. I'm completely self, which has its pluses and minuses, and really just kind of luck and opportunity and seizing it when it was in front of me got me to where I'm at today. And while I was at Logic Monitor, that's when I got used to Kubernetes. And as I was doing this Kubernetes thing, looking back at all my experience with Linux and like dabbling, not even dabble, I got deep into Linux. I was building this project called Linux from scratch. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. But it's exactly what it sounds like. It teaches you, it takes you through the whole process of how to build a Linux distribution from the bottom up, from like the C tool chain that's going to build the kernel to the user space, and you can log in to like actually installing it on a machine. So it teaches you like, here's how you create a Linux distribution from literally nothing. And pulling on that experience previously while I was at Logic Monitor, and then also coupling that with this experience I was having with Kubernetes, I just saw opportunity for optimization at the operating system level to fine tune it for the purposes of running Kubernetes. And so I spent a couple years building Talos Linux. And then one day I was like, okay, this has been fun. I've learned a lot. I'm getting a little tired. Let's see what the world thinks about it. And so my idea was, I put it on Reddit. It was Valentine's Day 2019. It was a Thursday, I believe. And I was like, okay, I'm going to put this out there. If people like it, great. That's cool. That'd be fun. If they don't, then okay, I've learned a lot. I go to bed and I wake up in the morning and I got like VCs calling me. I got personal emails and just people reaching out to me. It's on the front page of Hacker News. And I was like, wow, this is not what I was expecting. This is super cool. Maybe I'm onto something here. And at the time I had moved on from Logic Monitor. So I went back to Steve and I was like, hey, what do you think about starting a company? And now he's the CEO and I'm the CTO.
Oh, that's a cool story. I think I just love what a transition it is. I mean, from physics degree to software and then CTO, eventually starting your own company. I mean, I think that's like the story of dreams. Like that's what a lot of people want to live. So yeah, amazing that you got to live that story. Wow.
Yeah, I'm lucky. I would hesitate to say that anybody could do it because I think that there's a little bit of luck involved in life, just in various different ways, not in my path necessarily, but I do think I just put a lot into persistence. I'm not the smartest person in the world, if I'm being honest. I'm just a very persistent person and I don't give up. And when I put my mind to something, I just go after it. And I think, if there's any advice I could give to people that want to do this, you got to have that, especially in the startup world, because there's plenty of emotional ups and downs, and you just got to have that. You got to have that tenacity and that ability to say, "I'm going to get it done." That's the only reason why I'm here today, along with some luck and opportunity, of course. So yeah.
Wow. Yeah, and following your passion too. I mean, from Android and just a phone, so much would come from just that interest and hobby. You still have the phone, by the way.
I don't have the phone, but I almost bought one the other day just to try. I actually recently bought a Pine phone. I don't know if you've ever heard of them, but they're basically like SBCs with a LCD display on them. They're phones, and I got Talos running on it. I just messed up the networking. I got to get some networking drivers and stuff like that installed, and they're not upstream in Linux just yet, and so you got to compile this custom kernel, and it was just probably I don't have time to do that fun. 8 years ago, I'd have been all over that, and that's how I would have learned
Mhm.
something. But I've been there, done that, and I just don't have the energy for that right now as the CTO.
Wow, that's cool. That's cool. I should check that out. So, we're just preparing for this conversation. I saw that, Sidero Labs seems to focus on two major uh, parts of uh, the technology stack for company, and, bare metal, one of them, and uh, edge, the other. And I want to talk about that. And one thing, I see that terms get, uh, you know, defined differently by different people in the space. And I wanted
Yeah.
to actually start with just defining it so that we know where you're coming from, and so we're all on the same page, at least for this conversation. How would you define bare metal? And yeah, let's start with bare metal. How would you define bare metal?
Well, I think what I'd say first of all is there is only bare metal. there's this there's this false thing. There is this weird thing called the cloud, but at the end of the day, everything is bare metal. You can make the same argument for serverless. At the end of the day, there's servers underneath serverless.
Hmm.
So bare metal, I think it tends to have more of a meaning nowadays. Of course, it's you got your own data center and it's directly on the machine and there's no hypervisor, but it often gets um, sort of thrown in there with this idea of on premise in general, right? If you're, they're kind of used interchangeably sometimes. And so I would say that bare metal or on prem really is just taking the responsibility of running the things underneath a cloud uh, and doing it yourself, really. Um, Edge is interesting because Edge you could look at probably in three different ways, right? Um, it depends on who you ask, and I don't have the answer for what Edge really is. I think Edge is this very loose term, and it depends on who you ask. I can only talk about what we're seeing. And really, it's funny that I say that out loud because what we're seeing is probably the whole spread of all the arguments of what Edge is. We're seeing single node Kubernetes clusters running in, mines and out on the ocean on ships and in parking lots that are running car chargers, really edge, running off of satellite data or, mobile data. That's a form of edge, right? There's
Hmm.
also probably one step up above that where people are deploying something to less hostile environments like retail spaces or factory floors, which have a little more infrastructure underneath them. Um, and that's a form of edge, right? Edge, you see the data center providers sort of having these satellites that are closer to different regions, maybe for legal reasons or for performance reasons that they're calling edge to some degree. Like it's not the main, DC5 and Equinix. It's this little offshoot satellite edge thing. Um, and so I think really edge is a very loose term, and it depending on who you ask. But we're in a unique position because we kind of get to see all forms of edge and optimize for all of them.
Hmm. Hmm. Oh, okay, cool. So that's some good definitions right there. So about bare metal, I want to ask, you're talking about, running your own Kubernetes on servers. And for many, that would be really daunting because, that's the whole point behind just managed Kubernetes, because people don't want to manage it themselves and they want just simple, automatic updates, one-click installs. Yeah, just simplify the whole process end to end. So yeah, the whole challenge is there's so much to do. It's so complex.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess when you talk about managing it on your own, there's that inherent fear, is that even possible? Should we even attempt that? Isn't that
Yeah.
sounds crazy? What would you say to that?
Well, I would say that's exactly why I built Talos Linux.
Hmm.
So Talos Linux, what Talos Linux is, it's a reimagination of Linux for the purposes of running Kubernetes. So the reason I built Talos Linux is because when I was this junior operations engineer and was responsible for bringing some traffic, super excited about this, but I found that, you know, um, I'm having to do user management in in Kubernetes, user management on the Linux host, package management on the Kubernetes, package management on the host, hardening, upgrading, so on and so forth. It was 2 jobs, especially back then when no one knew Kubernetes. This was Kubernetes 1.7, 1.8. Still, a lot of people don't. Kubernetes is a very sought after skill. Especially back then, though, you're 100% doing 2 jobs. Even if you wanted to, you couldn't go out and hire someone for Kubernetes back then. And so you had to do both. And there was so much overlap that I wanted to just get rid of the operating system entirely. I wanted to just say, Kubernetes is my computer. And if you can kind of think about it in a very abstract way, each node really is just more RAM, CPU, and disk space in a larger machine that is Kubernetes. And we have this distributed scheduler that runs across multiple physical pieces of infrastructure. But the problem with traditional operating systems is that there's this human element still to them. You, Twain, could SSH into a box because it's 2 a.m. in the morning and, some customer is yelling at you, I need my service fixed, and you're going to type away until you get that fixed. But then you step away from that, and now maybe 5 out of your 10 nodes are different than each other. And so you have drift. And then you got to backport that to your configuration management and hope that it works the next time you bootstrap from scratch. And there's just this inherent risk of security-wise people getting on a machine even. And so my idea with Talos Linux is, let's throw all of that away. Let's just get rid of it entirely and allow you to focus on Kubernetes. And so what we've done with Talos Linux is we've actually rebuilt, just like Linux from scratch, everything from the bottom up. The kernel, the user space, there's no systemd. PID1 is a brand new PID1 that we've designed. It operates in a controller pattern, very much like Kubernetes. The way that you change the state of Linux is you supply a YAML configuration file that says, here's how I want my networking to look. Here's how I want my storage to look. And along the way, we've also built in operational knowledge on how to deploy and run and maintain Kubernetes over time. And so not only is it API managed, configuration driven Linux, read only, highly secure, 80 megabyte squash FS that runs in RAM, but it also knows how to deploy Kubernetes, upgrade Kubernetes, manage etcd. And so you could have a Kubernetes cluster running on bare metal in 5 to 10 minutes, I would argue. And in fact, we'll see one shortly here. So I would say that you should probably not use the more traditional approaches. I mean, I'm pretty biased, I would say. And I would say use Talos Linux, because really that is what it is built for. It is built to give you that cloud-like experience, but without removing all of the power and the freedoms that the cloud has, and without being restrained. So being flexible still, right? So yeah, Talos Linux really does solve this problem. And I know that sounds crazy to say, but you really just got to try it for yourself to really understand that and be a believer. I've had so many people come up to me like, I first heard about Talos Linux and it was like, what? Why would we get rid of bash? Why would we get rid of SSH? I don't even know if I mentioned that yet. There's no bash, there's no SSH. It's an API in front of in front of Linux. It's just a completely new paradigm, but it brings you so many more benefits. It's much more predictable, it's much more reliable, much more secure. And I've seen plenty of people convert in their opinion about this once they just try it. Because they just like, look, now that I've tried Talos Linux, I don't want to go back again. And I'm running it on Raspberry Pis at home. And now I'm trying to bring it into work, having it run AI for us. And, a lot of our growth has actually happened very organically. We don't even have a marketing team. It's just word of mouth from engineers. So you just got to try it for yourself to see what I mean, really.
Oh, amazing. What kind of use cases do you see for this? Do you see organizations that are running sort of like these, edge, or not to say, I don't want to say edge because, that would have different context, but then organizations kind of running small little projects that are just getting started on bare metal and all of their other main projects in the cloud. Do you see it used that way, more like for MVP and all of that, like testing projects, or do you see?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's a very good question. I'll put it to you like this. I think what we're not seeing is if you're all in on AWS and using EKS and all of your apps run on EC2 and you're using all the AWS services, Talos Linux and the Sidero Labs ecosystem doesn't make sense for you. And that applies for if you're all in on Azure, if you're all in on GCP, if you're all in on any one of the clouds, the value that you get back from what we do is probably significantly less than other cases. But the moment that you have any footprint anywhere else besides this single cloud, like, you know, companies, we're seeing them acquire other companies, and suddenly this company was in Azure and now this company is in AWS, but they're both running Kubernetes. And AWS offers this version of Kubernetes, and here's how fast you can upgrade, but Azure's slightly different. That's when we just become exponentially more valuable to companies, because what we do is we offer you a way to run consistent Kubernetes regardless of where you are. So I would say that the use cases that we're really seeing are people who are in a cloud and maybe they've acquired another company or are thinking about going on bare metal, and they want a footprint in bare metal. So they start to grow that. Greenfield edge deployments. We got this new cool idea because of AI, and so we're going to build this new product on top of Talos Linux. We're seeing platform teams. Nokia is one of our largest customers. They run one of the largest private clouds in the world, offering an internal platform service built on top of Talos Linux. We're working with some of the cloud providers as we speak, where they're going to start basically building their infrastructure and their platform offering on top of Talos. So it goes from, you know, small companies looking to optimize and save money we're seeing this huge pendulum swing going back into on-prem. Not fully. I don't think anyone's going to give up the cloud, but we're seeing people, they want footprints everywhere, and maybe even multi-cloud and maybe even hybrid. And so we're seeing small companies start in bare metal, and then they'll burst out to the cloud with our technologies on demand if you're a gaming company. We're seeing people, like I said, brand new idea. Let's put Kubernetes on car chargers in the Bay Area, in parking lots, and you know that's very edge. And we're kind of seeing hybrid, greenfield, you know, bare metal edge use cases. And I think that it's actually perfect timing, because there's a lot of talk in the industry right now about how expensive the clouds are getting. And so a ton of people are like, hey, these guys can make this close to as simple as the cloud, and we could save a ton of money. And so we're seeing people, you know, like I said, hybrid situations, edge, and all these things.
Mhm. Wow, very interesting. You know, almost every other episode here that I speak to somebody, the term cloud repatriation comes up. And I think it's really, you know, something that's really gotten a lot of attention in the past year or two with the economy and all of this. And yeah, I think it's quite interesting to know that also what you're saying is it's not a whole scale move away from cloud, because that could be painful and that's too
Yeah.
drastic. But I think what you're saying is it's more focused, and it's more it's there's a part of the cloud that's, you know, part of the workloads that are moving away from cloud coming
Yep.
onto bare metal and edge, and it's quite a sizable portion of you know, the workloads that organizations run, and that's really interesting, because it seems like there's a lot of interest in what you're doing, and that there's a real need for this, and that even if organizations don't want to move completely away, it's sizable enough that they should care about managing it well, whatever they move out of the cloud, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what people really want is they want the cloud anywhere now. You know, they want to be able to move across clouds. They don't want to be stuck to a single cloud, but we've been spoiled by some of the features of the cloud. And I think the reason why Kubernetes really, at least one of the reasons, it really took off is because it gives you the ability to build that on your own, a cloud like thing that can run anywhere. And so with a dedicated operating system for running Kubernetes that makes Kubernetes easy, you can now have this cloud like API anywhere that you want with it. And people want that flexibility. Okay, today maybe the spot instances in AWS are all taken up for the price that we want. Let's go try something in GCP. That's sort of the dream. Like we're seeing projects like Carpenter come up, getting super intelligent about scaling up and down. But we can't do that if all of the tooling is designed for operating on one cloud and one cloud only at a certain time. You know, there's some popular open source Kubernetes SIG endorsed projects out there that if you try to use this to manage Kubernetes, you create a Kubernetes cluster, it's only allowed to live in one cloud provider at a time. But I think people want this cloud that can sort of live anywhere and everywhere all at once. I hope that's not going to get you copyrighted. Anyways, I think that's what people want.
Yeah, really interesting. Talking about the cloud though, you mentioned that, costs are spiraling with the cloud, and that's making people want to move away. But then when you think of like the benefit that people associate with the cloud, the biggest one is probably scale, that you can instantly scale up and scale down.
Yeah.
That is one. And then there's also this peace of mind in terms of reliability, the 5 nines reliability, and that it's just someone else manages reliability. So when it comes to these two aspects, what's the approach that you take at Sedero, and how do you manage these two priorities, which is reliability and scale?
So I think, I mean, when it comes to scale, that's an interesting one, because there are ways to scale. Like if we're talking about scaling vertically on-prem, you don't necessarily need more instances. You could scale up just physically, right? That's one approach that people are taking, and they're doing some bin packing and whatnot, and that has cost benefits. But let's not forget that like these clouds are not infinite. I know they are seemingly infinite, but I've used plenty of clouds where, maybe they are the sort of B class ones, admittedly, but they're like, yeah, we don't have any more. We don't have any more. You can't. We don't have any more instances for you.
GPUs especially.
Sorry.
With GPUs especially, there's a shortage.
Yeah, with GPUs especially. But I do think that it's still a valid point, right? I mean, you're not left with figuring out how to do that on your own, right? But I think it comes to this point where you have to ask yourself, what's more important? Can we find a tool set that allows us to mimic that to some degree and save money at the same time? And that's kind of what we try to give. Like I said, we try to give you a cloud-like experience, appliance like Kubernetes, and we're going to be building more and more products that make this easier and easier for you. But you can also get the benefits of moving to on-prem with that. As far as reliability goes, yeah, of course, that's a tough one to beat, right? I mean, these cloud providers are all picking up the great networking engineers and this and that, but there's a lot of really good bare metal infrastructure providers out there that have really awesome teams behind them that you can partner with, and you could say, okay, we want to run, and you guys take care of the networking and the hardware portion of this, but we want to bring our software on top of it. And we're seeing our customers, collaborate with different infrastructure providers in that regard. And let's not forget, US East 1 and AWS goes down every couple of years, or maybe every 5 years. Like nothing is immune to this. Nothing is. But if we can continue to innovate, which is something that I want to do here at Sidero Labs, and if we can continue to innovate and improve sort of the baseline of what we're expecting out of operations, and what I mean by that is, why are we still doing things the same way we were 25, 30 years ago? You know what I mean? Like, why is infrastructure so hard, and as hard as it is today, when we have artificial intelligence potentially running on our phones and learning our psychological makeup as it hears us talk to people, and here we are barely able to manage infrastructure? We should be innovating. I saw a recent post on LinkedIn that I think is a prime example of this. Someone said, if you're going to get into Kubernetes, you got to be a master at Linux. And I just about fell out of my chair, just in disbelief that that's really something from someone in this position that would advocate for? Why are we still suggesting that we need mastery in something like Linux in order to reap the benefits of Kubernetes? I think that we should be moving towards how do we get rid of operations so that we can focus on more important things in this world that's going on? Do we really want to be 50 years from now still doing things like we SSHing into machines and doing configuration management and all these things? Why are we wasting human energy and time and money on these things when we could be innovating and getting rid of it? So that's what I have a passion for and a drive for to do here at Sidero Labs. I want to innovate to the point where reliability in operations is just kind of something you expect out of this product, and it's the norm.
All right, all right. Wow, that's powerful. So, so you've been building the product named Omni for some time now, and it manages Kubernetes on bare metal and edge infrastructure. So yeah, I was wondering if you could show us a bit of what it can do visually, and just maybe a little demo of spinning
Yeah,
up a Kubernetes cluster or something of that sort, and just show us what it looks like.
yeah, let's do that. Um, let me share my window. Tell me if you can see this.
Yep, I can.
Okay, do I need to make it bigger?
A little,
Is
yeah,
that
this is
better?
good. All right.
Cool. So this is Omni. This is the front page. Really what it is a cluster and Linux management solution built exclusively on top of Talos Linux. So like I said, Talos Linux runs entirely off of APIs and declarative configuration. The whole goal of Talos Linux is to get humans off of the machine. And I'm trying to coin this term machine Linux. We have desktop Linux and we have server Linux. And both of those imply to some degree that humans are involved. But Talos Linux is the first Linux distribution that tries to get humans off of the machines. And the fact that we have an API allows us to do some very, very interesting things. And I'll just go into this list of machines here. So what you're looking at is a list of machines that have been booted up with 3 kernel arguments with Talos Linux. Those kernel arguments tell Talos Linux, here's how and where you connect to Omni. Here's where I want you to send your console logs. And here's where I want you to send an event stream. So in the same way that you can do kubectl get events, we have talosctl events. And those events are utilized in this product to make decisions about the state of the machine. The API is utilized to, everything you're seeing here is completely API driven. If you were to plug in a processor or a memory stick into this machine, it would pop up dynamically because Talos Linux is going to, it's bidirectional gRPC APIs. We can actually do watches on these things. And so, we can get, here's the processors, here's the version of Talos Linux. Everything that you see here is completely API driven. And so these machines have been booted up with these 3 kernel args. And what happens is they establish a point-to-point WireGuard tunnel. And then from there, we have a secure manner in which we can use the Talos APIs to do anything that we want to this machine. No one has to write an SSH script or a bash script and SSH in and execute it. No one has to do anything. You just boot the machine. It comes here. It shows up. And Omni is going to use the Talos APIs to do what we try to do. It's to create Kubernetes clusters. So we have some machines here. I'm going to go over here. I'm going to say create cluster. We'll just name it demo. I want Talos 174 and Kubernetes 130.2. If I need any special configuration for a particular machine, like maybe, well, let's first of all choose this one as a control plane node and this one as a worker node. If I need, I don't know, maybe the host name I wanted to set to this. Here is an example of the Talos configuration file. I just specify this on this particular machine, and we can use the Talos APIs to push that configuration patch to this machine. And now you've done the equivalent of going onto the box, SSHing in, writing all your Puppet or Chef or Ansible automation to update the host name. It's just a simple declarative configuration file in Talos Linux. And I could do something similar at the cluster level. And in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to enable something called kubespan. Kubespan is a slightly different WireGuard use case. And what it is instead of establishing a point-to-point tunnel between Omni and Talos, it creates a mesh between the nodes that end up being part of your Kubernetes cluster so that you can have true hybrid Kubernetes clusters. So we have users that are running on-prem and bare metal and they'll burst out to the cloud, or we have users that have control planes in the cloud, but then edge machines that are running on bare metal. We could do that all seamlessly. Kubernetes doesn't need to know about it. No one needs to know about it. And it's just enabled by this Boolean flag. If you were doing this with more traditional Linux distributions, you'd have to go in, you have to create a WireGuard interface, generate PKI for WireGuard, exchange keys. There's just a whole mess that has to happen in order to do something like this. And in Talos Linux, it's just a simple Boolean flag. So I'm going to enable kubespan. If maybe I need iSCSI, because Talos isn't going to come with iSCSI out of the box, I'm going to say I want this iSCSI tools, which allows you to use CSIs like Longhorn and basically iSCSI based ones with Talos Linux. Maybe I want it on that machine. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to say create cluster. And what's going to happen under the hood is we're going to generate all of the configuration files that Talos Linux needs. We're going to securely encrypt them, store them in etcd, and we're going to use the Talos APIs to push those configuration files to the machine. And again, all of that operational knowledge on how to run Kubernetes is baked into Talos Linux. And now we're building on top of that operational knowledge on how do you do this at scale? How do you manage multiple Kubernetes clusters in a seamless, easy way? How do you upgrade? You know, you could go over here and you could say, I want to update Talos, or I want to upgrade Kubernetes. There's no newer version, so it's grayed out. And everything you're seeing here is completely API driven. So if I go in here and I click on one of these machines, you're going to see some errors here for a minute because Talos Linux is installing and it's generating PKI. But here's the entirety of every service running on that machine right now. And if I wanted to know more about that machine, we're going to use the APIs. This one's starting. It's now waiting. It's preparing. Okay, it's running. 31 seconds ago, it was running. API based. If I wanted to go and I wanted to get console logs, again, API based. Lightweight monitoring metrics. Of course, you're going to want a fuller stack on top of this. Completely API based. Everything you see, this is like top, right? But all gRPC APIs. So dynamically, instantaneously updated on the fly. We're not pulling anything here. I could look at the configuration file. This is the entirety of the configuration file. 111 lines of YAML that manages and defines the entirety of what you want out of Kubernetes and Talos Linux. And it goes on, right? I could see which extensions, which mounts, patches, and so on and so forth. I could click on services. I can get logs for the services, all completely API based. If we go back to this overview, within a few minutes, well, let's actually click on one of these logs. Let's on one of these machines and see where it's at. So this is a common error. And all this means is that Kubernetes is coming up and running, but the node hasn't registered itself yet. It looks scary. But if you know Kubernetes at all, you know that it takes time. Like the API server is going to come up and the kubelet's going to hit it and try to register. It's going to say that node's not found. And eventually it's going to register itself and it's going to come online. And at that point, this is, a Kubernetes cluster up and running in that short time. And this very well could have been bare metal, a single node running on the edge, a mix of bare metal and edge, a mix of AWS and Azure, a mix of bare metal and Azure, whatever you want. You want Kubernetes somewhere, we can put it there and we can get it running in 5 minutes.
Wow.
That's the gist of it. Yeah. So, I mean, like you said, people, how do we do this? How are we going to do this on bare metal? I mean, we did a stream with the Ampere folks recently, and they gave us access to their labs, and we did a joint live stream together. And they're like, okay, how do we get this running? We're like, okay, well, pixie boot off of this endpoint. It's going to join Omni, and we had a Kubernetes cluster up and running within 5-10 minutes on bare metal. Brand new environment Talos Linux has never been installed to. Assuming you have functioning networking and functioning machines, they were up and running. So, to your point earlier, like this is how are we going to do this? This is my point. It's solved. It's a solved issue. Now let's put this behind us. Let's get behind this type of idea, even if this isn't in the form of Sidero Labs and And Talos Linux in the future, I think this is the experience we should get from operations anywhere in the world, and it's here.
Yeah. Wow. That's pretty cool. I just like how quick it is, and it seems effortless is definitely like what you mentioned. I think bringing the cloud experience to bare metal and edge, and that's quite a big challenge in itself. And I think quite elegant the way you guys have solved for this with Omni. Pretty cool.
Thank you.
Uh, yeah, and so when you're managing your own infrastructure, right, in this way, so we already spoke about some of the different concerns, but one thing that I think also just bears mentioning in this conversation is just about what about security, and how about that, especially when every other week we read about another big breach that happened. Uh, how's it in terms of security? What are some of the things that you built in to secure uh, workloads, to secure all that's running in Omni?
Yeah.
Could you talk about that?
Yeah, so I'll start with Talos Linux first because that kind of works its way up to Omni. And
Mhm.
again, going back to this idea of how do we get rid of the operating system, you can't truly do that if you're still concerned about the security of it, right? The most secure thing and the most robust thing that you can run in the world is no code. That is what we want to get close to. We want to make sure that it's so secure and it's so minimal and it's read only and no one can mess with it, so that we don't have to worry about it anymore. And so some of the ways that we do that is Talos Linux is just a 80 megabyte Squash FS. Unique thing about Squash FS is you can't remount it as read write. It is read only by nature, and that's the only way that you can run it. So you can't go in, you can't change anything about Talos Linux, at least the core of it. It's also hardened with a KSPP hardened Linux kernel. It's called the Kernel Self Protection Project. And that project, like, just to give you an example of one of the cool things about that, some might argue whether it's cool or not, but when we're talking about security, I'll say it's cool. You can't just go into Talos Linux and compile a kernel module and load it, right? Because who knows what that kernel module is going to do. What we do in Talos Linux is at compile time, the Linux make system, build system, has a way to generate a key so that at build time, all of the kernel modules are signed with this key, and then that key is thrown away. So what that means is you can't just go on and load any module. It has to be signed by this key, but that key does not exist. It's long gone. So you have a completely immutable and verifiable Linux kernel at that point, right? We've also implemented something we're calling trusted boot, which is a combination of like TPM encryption of the disk and secure boot. So one will verify the other, so you can get validated boots all the way through up to Talos Linux, because Talos Linux is completely reproducible build. Anyone in the world can go and build Talos Linux, and they can look at the checksum of what we have officially, and they can look at what they've built, and they can say, yes, this is the version of Talos Linux that is open source and no one has tampered with this. Mutual TLS encrypted API. So we're using that to secure all the Talos CTL commands and the gRPC API. We're also going to go further down this path, and we're going to secure Kubernetes itself for you. We're going to go with the CIS benchmarks, and we're going to deploy Kubernetes per the CIS benchmark standards. Talos Linux now has its own CIS benchmarks that's about to be released. In fact, might be released by the time this is published. So you could see that, like, I don't even want to say security is a priority. I think security is part of our identity, because, like I said, and I'm going to sound like a broken record at this point, in order to get rid of the operating system, it has to be secure and it has to be as minimal as possible. And so we go to great lengths to make it secure. But again, we want to make it so that operationally it's not a burden. There was this argument earlier in this conversation that Kubernetes is hard and all of this. Why can't we do that for security as well, right? We just showed that you could do this and get all of the benefits of spinning up Kubernetes quickly and fast. And it's all highly secure, and you didn't have to worry about that at all, right? So this is the type of innovation I want to take even further. I think we're just kind of scratching the surface on the type of things that we could do. And I believe it's because of an API implementation and some of the design goals around Talos Linux.
Mhm. Wow. Which would you say is a bigger driver for organizations wanting to run their workloads on the edge or on bare metal? Is it the need to save on cost, or is it the need for more flexibility and control over where they run, what they run, or is it something else at all? What do you think is the key driver
Yeah,
for?
that's a very good one because it's the answer everyone hates it, and it depends, right?
Mm.
If you're a small to mid-sized company, you're probably more cost conscious of things, and so you're looking for ways to optimize. I would even say that there's bigger mid-sized companies that they just got their Series C, and they just got their $100 million, and they don't want to worry about this silly stuff anymore. Let's offload this to the cloud and let's give them our problems. And so they're much more prone to just saying, okay, we're going to solve this problem by throwing money at it. But when you're at that scale, you also probably have acquired some teams, or maybe you have a footprint, not just in AWS. Maybe you have footprints other than just this single AWS and VPC. Now it's Azure and AWS, and so they're looking for ways to be more resilient. And what happens? Like they're at a scale, they're getting to this point where they're at a scale where, what if the cloud goes down? How can we be resilient to that? And so they're starting to have multi-cloud. And so really it depends where you're at, and sometimes it's a mixture of both at both ends, and sometimes it's bifurcated and sometimes it's not.
Wow, fascinating. Winding down, but yeah, one of the last questions I want to ask is also what you mentioned just now, which is about organizations that have grown to a sizable momentum, and they have teams now, and for them, yeah, we're talking about managing their own infrastructure. Uh, Obviously, they'll probably save running on bare metal than on the cloud, but then there's the expenses of having a team, the talent, and all of that, and just making
Yeah.
sure they keep hiring and maintaining that team and its quality. What are some of the things you've seen in terms of that? How is something like Talos changed teams, or what organizations can do with their same team, or even with when they're already, just a small team and they can't
Yeah.
afford more than that. Could you talk a bit about that, kind of the culture and the team implications of something like Talos?
Yeah, absolutely. We're seeing anywhere from like some of the largest private clouds in the world loving Talos Linux because now they can offer a platform that no one can mess with, and they're able to scale up and down quickly, all the way down to, we're a startup gaming company and we're going to go on bare metal because we want cost savings. And they're able to do this with, of course, with like admittedly, these are companies that most often partner with a company that will handle the networking and stuff like that. But I would say that across the board, it goes back to what I was saying. If we don't have to put this time and energy into these types of things anymore, we could put that time and energy into more important things. And so teams naturally are going to become more efficient. They're going to have more mental energy and capacity to figure out networking, whatever they might need, right? You could put that energy and cash and anything that you can imagine towards more important business logic. I haven't met a company yet that's excited about spending money on operational things. No one is excited about it. And so, you know, it's again, it depends. We're seeing large teams that are just some of the best networking engineers on planet Earth love Talos Linux because it's declarative and it's kind of what they want, and they're more efficient with it. All the way down to teams who have no bare metal experience but are willing to take that risk because they feel confident in our product. So I think that kind of speaks volumes really to the impact that we're having.
Wow, amazing. That's really cool. Thanks so much for just joining us today and sharing all of this, Andrew. It was a pleasure
Yeah.
just listening to you. Really interesting conversation here. Before you go, though, just one question to get to know you a bit more. Um, Going back to kind of the start, you mentioned that you started out with your interest in music, and that got you into tech, something on those lines. Could you tell us a bit
Hmm.
more about your interest in music and what were you trying at
Yeah.
that time? Music.
Yeah, that's a fun one. I was making beats for rappers in the Bay Area for like my early teens into my like mid to late 20s. I was making um, beats for rappers, and I was recording people, and I was mixing. And lately, for the last year or two, I opened up a mastering studio. So I'll take people's music, and I'll clean it up, and I'll get it ready for distribution, and I just make it sound polished. In fact, I'm sitting in my mastering studio as we speak. Um, and that has been really, it's interesting. I did this, as silly as this sounds, like I did this for the sake of the company in a strange way, because like I was working 18-hour days, sun up to sundown, going crazy, trying to make this startup work, but I had no outlet necessarily. I was still doing jujitsu, but I had no creative outlet. Like in this tech world, obviously everything's super technical and scientific and logical, but my creative side started to just wither away and die, and I felt like that was eating away at my soul to some degree and at my happiness. So I decided to pick music back up, but I don't have the time to make music anymore, because it involves a very intense creative sort of mind state that you got to get into. And I have kids running into my room, and there's just no way I can do that again. And I can't necessarily do mixing and recording because I don't have the space for that. So mastering allows me to spend 30 minutes to an hour every other day on music and just get a creative outlet. And I could talk with artists who know nothing about Kubernetes. They don't even know who I am, because I work in a space where like, oh yeah, you created Talos Linux, that's super cool. Tell me about it, blah blah blah. Now I get to go to this space where they don't know, who I am, and we're just talking about something completely unrelated to something I'm immersed in all the time, which is Linux and Kubernetes and all these things. And so that's that's what I hope to do after I'm done with technology. Is I want to tap into my creative side and hopefully open up a beautiful studio somewhere in California, and just you know see what's after that eventually. But that's how I got started with it, making music, mixing and creating, and then now I'm getting into mastering.
Wow, amazing. Yeah, I just love our conversation. I love how you're getting to kind of live, the life you really want to live, and yeah, pursue your hobbies and your talents, and that's really cool. I hope you do get a chance to build out that studio and live
Thank you.
uh, with music one day.
I hope
Uh,
so too. Thank you.
yes, that was a great conversation. Thanks so much for joining us, Andrew. Yeah, and hope to have you again soon.
Yeah, I had a blast. Thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you for joining us as well, everybody. We hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you like what you hear, go and check out more on the website of Sidero Labs. Just Google them, Sidero, Sidero Labs. And you can even get in touch with Andrew Rynhard, that's Rynhard, on LinkedIn or elsewhere. Yeah, we hope you enjoyed this conversation, and we'll see you on the next one.